What if I told you you could complete the slaughter shaft on Mayhem 4 without firing your weapons? What if I told you you could complete the Malawan takedown on Mayhem 4, well, except for Wotan, without even holding a gun or throwing a grenade, in about 15 minutes, and without being spec'd into any capstones? Yes, with the inventory you see here. This game has billions of possible guns? I don't care. I mean, you may need a Cutsman for Wotan. And a fire Cutsman for Tyrene. Okay, so you can't really do bosses without a gun, but the gun choice is up to you. Use your good guns, use your favorite guns, just pick something up off the floor, it doesn't matter. Cause yo, we slammin'. Finally, slam is useful. Welcome to TESLAMARA. I'm gonna roll some more gameplay and, as I like to do, I want you to guess what class mod I'm using. You might find a clue you can use later to figure it out. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I get tired of using meta builds, and I have no interest in getting the latest gun that was super buffed and making it the centerpiece of my character. As you may know from my last build video, I just like to have fun. And what's fun for me is coming up with unique and capable builds, using whatever the hell guns I want, and finding a use for underappreciated class mods. Oh, and we recently got 3 new Guardian rank perks? PogChamp. We're doing all of that again today. There are 2 principles of this build. 1, we need maximum slam damage. Unbuffed slam damage is about as effective as a fly sneeze. Thankfully, there are ways to make slam a Mayhem 4 mobbing machine. 2, we need to be tanky, with lots of damage reduction. Slamming at enemies necessarily means we have to get up close and personal, and we're vulnerable for a fraction of a second while we slam. We'll be taking a lot of hits. Let's check out the skill trees. In the green tree, we put 3 points into personal space because we'll be in our enemies' faces most of the time. When you want to fire your gun, this will boost your damage significantly. 5 points go to clarity to boost our healing and sometimes help us get above health gauge when we're in a tight situation. We max out Helping Hands for 40% damage reduction. This is a highlight skill and the first of 3 pillars of damage reduction for this build. We're going to have Helping Hands up 100% of the time. Then we put 3 points into Mindfulness, which makes our shield recharge faster, which, as we learned from my previous video, helps us take advantage of Topped Off. The extra movement speed will get us within slam range and also allow us to get out of areas where we're taking too much damage. In the blue tree, we put 2 points into Do Harm and 3 into Violent Tapestry. We'll be using Ties That Bind, so Do Harm will increase the damage of linked enemies. Violent Tapestry will proc status effects more often, giving us max rush stacks and giving us bonus damage from Harmageddon. Pretty much every enemy we damage will end up with at least 2 status effects. We max Transcend because we will be able to crit from our slam effects, and extra crit damage will also help us with single targets, where this build needs a little extra help. Restless gets all 5 points. You know, I hate fake grasping, but it's necessary with this build. We're working with slam after all. However, we will also be real grasping just as often. Actually, phase grasping will give us an enormous boost to healing and destroy groups of enemies. We want our phase grasp back again as soon as possible. Plus, action skill cooldown rate isn't a core requirement of this build, but it's still very important. If you're waiting around for your grasp to come back, it will slow you down significantly and make you more vulnerable. Last for the blue tree, 1 point into Ascendant. Allure will be our augment, and Ascendant doubles its radius. We spend the most points in the red tree, starting with 5 into Anima and 5 into Tempest. Our slam will be doing elemental damage, and is mostly boosted by Tempest. Our status effect damage isn't as great as our direct elemental damage, but it adds up, so Anima is helpful. 1 point into Wildfire will give us an extra chance to proc rush stacks by spreading our status effects around if enemies aren't properly socially distanced. Now we need to spend a bunch of points to get down to the bottom of the tree. These points won't benefit our slam, but they will benefit whatever guns we decide to use, if we decide to use them. Infusion gets 1 point for spawning an extra set of projectiles when using guns that spawn multiple projectiles. Steady Hands gets maxed out, 1 point to Dread, and 1 point to Deep Well. Then 3 points into Indiscriminate, probably the best synergy to Ties That Bind. Now we've finally arrived at Sustainment, the source of our healing. Again, our slam will do elemental damage, and it will heal us through Sustainment. It doesn't get maxed out though, only 4 points. We could actually get away with fewer points here, but I think this is the best place for them. And lastly, we need 1 point for Conflux. Conflux will add more status effects and, therefore, make Harmageddon more effective. We don't have enough points to get Forceful Expression, but that's okay. It doesn't boost our slam elemental damage. If you're using elemental guns a lot and you want that extra damage, you can take a point from Clarity and put it here. As mentioned before, we're using Ties That Bind and Allure. When mobbing, Ties That Bind will amplify your damage and make groups of enemies disappear pretty quickly. Allure is used for making enemies stumble, stunning them for a few seconds. When you're not close enough to slam but enemies are still raining bullets upon you, a quick grasp with Allure will stop them long enough for you to get close and deal your own damage and begin healing. Stillness of Mind would work as well, but it makes our cooldown a little too long for my tastes. It's time. Do you have a guess for the class mod that I was using during the gameplay earlier? It was the Breaker class mod. You might have seen Jab Cross below my XP bar, even though we don't spec into it. Slam counts as melee damage in some ways, and it procs Jab Cross. Not that we're using the Breaker for Jab Cross, no, we're using it for damage reduction, but we'll come back to that. Let's talk about how we can get Slam to do a lot of damage. We do this with the Spark Plug. With this relic, when you slam, it plants a Tesla coil in the ground that continuously shocks any enemies in range. And enemies in range can chain that damage even further to enemies outside the normal range of the coil. The shock damage from the coil isn't too impressive on its own, but it gets boosted by a few things. First, it's increased by our 5 points in Tempest. It would also be boosted by anything else that adds elemental damage, such as shock damage as a passive on the artifact. Second, bonus elemental damage anointments on our shield and grenade are also added to the coil's damage. Even shock damage on action skill end will boost the base shock damage on the coil. Here I'm showing the old God shield, by the way, from the second DLC, Guns, Love, and Tentacles. It boosts elemental damage. As long as its element is shock or one that matches our anointments, we'll get bonus damage. It also grants elemental resistances. This is an amazing shield for this build, but not required. Third, when the electric tether from the coil chains itself between multiple enemies, its damage gets multiplied. This ability is the main reason why the Spark Plug is so great at mobbing. And when you add Ties That Bind into the mix, you can obliterate groups of badasses in seconds. Now look at the other half of this relic. This is the relic that started me on the path to making this build. Safeguard. Slamming grants 57% damage reduction for 5 seconds. 57! That's a ton! And we slam so often that 5 seconds is more than enough. Safeguard is the second pillar of damage reduction in this build. The first, remember, is Helping Hands. In all honesty, this relic alone, with elemental damage anointments on our shield and grenade, is really all we need, but there's more to discuss. The third pillar of damage reduction is the newest class mod, Stone, also from the second DLC. The Stone grants damage reduction based on how many rush stacks we have, and it increases our max rush stacks by 5 for a total of 15 with this build. We aren't spec'd into Avatar, which will give us 10 more and a total of 25, but that's alright. Stone still gives us lots of damage reduction, and we build rush stacks very quickly with the Spark Plug and all the status effects it causes. This class mod caused me to do a ton of testing regarding how damage reduction is calculated in this game. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a solid handle on an exact formula. There seems to be more going on behind the scenes than I can figure out. Or there was some flaw in my testing, some uncontrolled variable that I didn't notice. I can't even tell you how effective the Awakening bonus is. So while I don't have exact numbers, I can say with confidence though that the damage reduction from Stone with max rush stacks is on par with Helping Hands and Safeguard. It's very effective. So we have 3 pillars of damage reduction making us extremely tanky, but we actually only need 2 of the 3. Helping Hands is part of our skill set, so in practice all we need to do is choose between Stone and Safeguard. This is where the flexibility of this build arises. If we use the Stone class mod, we don't need the Safeguard legendary artifact. So what to replace Safeguard with? Out of the range of options that we have, the one that further adds the most to slam damage is the Cosmic Crater. Cosmic Crater creates a random elemental puddle when we slam, dealing area damage. With Sparkplug and Cosmic Crater, every slam results in both a coil and an elemental puddle. The puddle isn't quite as damaging as the coil, but it is still a great help. Additionally, like the coil, the puddle adds our bonus elemental damage from our shield and grenade, and that also heals us with sustainment. This is as deadly as slam gets. So the Sparkplug Cosmic Crater with the Stone class mod is one version of the build. But what if we choose Safeguard as our second pillar of damage reduction instead of Stone? What class mod should we use? One option is the Nimbus class mod. The Nimbus adds points to Tempest, among other skills, which in turn increases all of the damage we're doing with the Sparkplug. Further, the damaging cloud that the Nimbus creates when you phase grasp an enemy is based off of the gun you're holding. I know, who even holds guns anymore in 2020, but hear me out. If your weapon has a damage over time stat, it's based off of that. If it doesn't, it's based off of the normal damage on the card. If it's a multi-pellet weapon, it is based off of a single pellet. So if you want to have that cloud wreck everything, including Wotan, just find a ×1 non-elemental ion cannon. If you want to use a regular old gun for any sort of content, the Nimbus will still do great single target damage. Here's an example of the sort of damage we do when holding a Cutsman. Just look at all those damage numbers. This is normal with this build. The Nimbus is adding the ones between 10 and 20k. All this to say, the Nimbus mod synergizes with our slam build, but also allows you to play like a Nimbus focus build with crazy single target damage. You can choose your gun to suit the Nimbus and not worry about affecting your slam game. Mobbing and single target and bossing all in one. Another good class mod to use with the Safeguard is the Golden Rule. This will make our action skill cooldown much faster, especially if we pair it with a Band of Sidorak shield. See my previous build video if you want a deep dive on how that works and cooldown in general. With a fast cooldown, we can use Ties That Bind more often, proc our bonus elements more often, and proc Clarity's bonus healing more often. Plus, the Golden Rule can give us a bonus to Helping Hands, which is what we should look for in this mod. Finally, we've made it back to the Breaker. This class mod is a lot like the Stone for our purposes. We're using it for straight damage reduction, which increases the closer we are to enemies. With this mod, just like with the Stone, we can use the Cosmic Crater artifact for increased slam damage. Unfortunately, I can only recommend using a breaker that has additional damage reduction as a passive bonus. Otherwise, it simply isn't enough. On top of that, it will need to be supplemented by a shield that increases our tankiness. You might think we could use the Rough Rider, but at this point, the extra damage reduction on the Rough Rider suffers too much from diminishing returns. There are better options. One is the old reliable backhand. 56% damage reduction from behind is enough to be helpful, but it also gives you a high bullet reflection rate. That's the sort of defense that will supplement our damage reduction quite well. In the same vein, and even better than the backhand, is the Rico from the first DLC, Moxie's Heist. The Rico has a ridiculously high reflection rate, up to 80% both when shielded and when depleted. Obviously, the Stone is better than the Breaker because it reduces damage at any distance, and we aren't required to find one with extra damage reduction. No matter what class mod you use though, it is highly recommended to use one with plus action skill cooldown rate. We want the same bonus on our artifact. With level 53 cooldown rate bonuses plus our 5 points into Restless, we will have a total of plus 80% cooldown rate, giving our Ties That Bind a cooldown of 10 seconds, perfectly matching the 10 seconds that our bonus elemental damage anointments last for. So that's our 4 setups: Stone and Cosmic Crater in any shield, or Nimbus and Safeguard in any shield, or Golden Rule and Safeguard in any shield, and Breaker and Cosmic Crater in the Backham or the Rico. If you use a setup that includes the Cosmic Crater, I would switch it out for the Safeguard when fighting Wotan. Let's go over some good shields we can use if we're not using the Breaker. We have mentioned a few already. The Rico and the Backham increase our tankiness. The Band of Sidorak increases our cooldown rate with Topped Off and Shield Reboot and Emergency Response and Mindfulness. The Old God increases our elemental damage and elemental damage resistance. For extra cooldown, we can also use the Loop of Angel, while disabling Shield Reboot and Emergency Response. The All-In is also a good shield for extra cooldown. You can switch in the Transformer if you like when fighting the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa and its powerful lightning attack. These are the most helpful shields, but really, you can use whatever you want. Something like the Stopgap wouldn't be too effective though. It will rarely get to recharge to full. and your guns can be whichever ones you like, even none. But this build will certainly proc all of the on-action skill and anointments, so those would be beneficial for sure. It's worth pointing out that since our Tesla coil can crit, walking around with an Unforgiven can result in some surprising increases in damage. This wraps up the build. This is TESLAMARA. However, it's very important to note that this isn't just a build, it is also a build supplement. I mentioned before that the spark plug safeguard is really all we need to have a slam build, as long as we're spec'd right. A lot of Amara builds already spec into Helping Hands, Tempest, and Sustainment, and any build that has those skills can become part TESLAMARA by using the spark plug safeguard. This artifact is very good at mobbing, so even an otherwise very strong meta build could benefit from this in my opinion. It makes for an interesting gameplay change-up if nothing else. By the way, I've been showing god rolled items on the screen, but not because they are required. In all of the gameplay footage you've seen here, I've used items with the bare minimum stats necessary, even some level 50 and 53 items. I killed Wotan with a Cutsman that has a Gamma Burst anointment. I'm showing you these items because they are for you. There's a link to download this save file in the description. I said at the end of my last video that I'm not a YouTuber or content creator, and I still think that. It's not my goal to be either one of those things. Yet, here I am again. Okay, now go away.